As the old saying goes, if you stare long into the abyss stares back into you. And sometimes looking at the 2024 roadmap can feel like that, when you begin to realise there's in fact a lot of questions regarding the progression of expansions for the Classic timeline, as we start to head towards Cataclysm's launch this year. And a question I've raised a fair bit, as well as the majority of the Classic fan base, is how far is Classic WoW going to progress with its expansions? Cata's announcement reflected the first time we've seen a bit of a pushback towards the Classic WoW team, besides the WoW token, of course. I think it's fair to say that the majority of decisions and content pumped out since 2019 has been pretty great and fairly intelligent decisions, dare I say it, that seem to reflect the Classic WoW community's requests, all of which has led us to getting Season of Discovery, arguably and almost certainly the most popular Classic WoW has been since its launch. Yet something begins to rear its ugly head, with many people starting to ask, what on earth is that? Yes, we're beginning to question if we'll be heading into Mists of Pandaria Classic after Cataclysm before it's even out. And in this video by Willie, he states he thinks there could already be a potential roadmap leading up to Legion, based on re-experience of expansions and how much the Classic WoW community is likely to be willing to put up with, such as experiencing Warlords of Draenor again, knowing that we do get to play Legion in the end. Now, although I can see such a roadmap happening, I really hope it doesn't happen under the guise of Classic World of Warcraft. So when I say that I hope Classic Mists of Pandaria doesn't happen, I mean it. But I am open to revisiting these expansions in a bit of a different light, and would welcome seeing them again, so let me explain. First, I think it's important to know I was there for Mists' announcement, and let me tell you, if you don't remember it or you weren't playing WoW at the time, people were really not happy. A large chunk of the player base had dropped out of Cata, stating that WoW wasn't the same anymore, and they destroyed the old world and the game was back to being too hard, whilst also not having enough of a charm or draw towards it to make the difficulty feel worthwhile, which then got ultimately blasted out of the water by Raid Finder. So when everyone got excited to see what was coming for our next expansion, and we got Kung Fu Panda, you can bet a lot of people were really quite disheartened, especially following the content drought and disappointment of Dragon Soul. So naturally, a lot of my friends and other players did quit the game as they didn't see the appeal for Mists. However, once we actually went to Pandaria, it was actually a pretty great expansion, with some pretty interesting ideas to class balancing, as well as some fantastic raids like Throne of Thunder and Siege of Orgrimmar. But ultimately, there was that one core issue of it being set around the pandas, an idea that worked for some were impartial to, such as myself, I didn't really care, and others absolutely hated it. Yet Mists did set out with an interesting aim to make the game about this new continent and experiencing a world as the main character for a change again. So if there's so many good things about this expansion, why don't I want Mists of Pandaria Classic? Well, for one simple reason, it isn't Classic WoW by any stretch of the idea in the slightest. Classic has a great community drive that really cares, mainly about the old world, that enjoyed revisiting Burning Crusade and Wrath of the Lich King. But Classic typically revolves around staying in the old world, and Cataclysm ended that, hence why it's seen as a cut-off point a lot of the time. Now, as I kind of hinted at, I've no issue with revisiting expansions leading up to Legion, for example, or however far they decide to take it. I just don't want the fantastic brand that Classic WoW has been built up to be, that is so clearly cared for by the Classic WoW community, to then become a pretty divisive place, due to the brand of Classic being used as an option to funnel easy content. So if we are to progress past Cataclysm, I'd argue that a rebrand for the progression of old expansions, excluding Burning Crusade and Wrath of the Lich King at base level, is very necessary. Just as an easy idea, in retail WoW, we already have time walking raids, alongside time walking questing, and I doubt it would be hard to rebrand the progression of expansion releases in a similar manner somehow, naming them maybe time walking expansions, rather than slowly alienating the Classic fan base by labelling expansions still as Classic WoW, way past the point of what Classic WoW was set up to be. Cata is already coming out as Classic Cataclysm, but I don't think it's too late for Blizzard to rebrand what they're doing with the expansion releases in time for Mists, if they're deciding to head that far, which is what they seem to be doing. That way we can leave Classic to revolve around vanilla era, hard Hardcore WoW Season of Discovery, which seems to be lining up as a test period for a more permanent version of Classic Plus, and then the potential for servers that cycle through maybe Burning Crusade and Wrath if there is a demand for that kind of thing further down the line. And if you think the name of what they're releasing the expansions under doesn't matter, oh, believe me, it certainly matters. And there's a very large army of neckbeards ready to completely disagree with you, and anyone who takes such a naive viewpoint on such a thing. So of course what they're releasing these expansions under the name of does matter, and the Classic community matters in defending what has been built, and almost protecting it from Blizzard ruining it for itself again somehow. For example, a bit of a similar case would be if old school RuneScape released skills just because they're old as well. For example, adding summoning into old school RuneScape just because summoning was released quite some time ago too, and it would detract from the core element of what OSRS is meant to be, and likely antagonise a lot of the player base who said, we don't want this. Where new content can still be added to old school RuneScape, but there is certainly a cutoff point for what can be added into the game. And similar to Cataclysm back in the day, I was excited for summoning to come out into RuneScape, only for when it did to be extremely disappointed and feel like the game I loved in RuneScape had just changed for the worse in many ways. And as a result, it does seem to be that after the past 4 to 5 years, that the core base experience of what we deem to be Classic WoW seems to revolve around the old world, old talent trees and the journeys in it, even down to some aspects such as the graphics in Classic WoW. So once again, I'd happily revisit Mists of Pandaria under a progression of experiencing old expansions through a new type of branding that can coexist alongside retail and Classic WoW. Something Blizzard definitely won't be doing, but I can only hope that they try and go ahead with that sort of thing, just to respect the Classic fan base in that matter. I mean, if anything, having another strain of WoW to advertise on a subscription fee would certainly look good to potential WoW subscribers regardless, as retail finally seems to be in a healthy place, alongside Season of Discovery and what realistically has been a successful few years of transitioning from vanilla to Burning Crusade to Wrath of the Lich King, outside of the WoW token of course. And Kata once again is that first raised eyebrow. And for me, I think maybe Kata at push could be considered Classic WoW. If you wanted to make the argument, it's classic because it's the first time you get to see the old world change into the new world. But let's be honest, I think that's a bit of a stretch and that's about as far as I could take it. And I certainly don't see how you could deem Mists as Classic WoW. Maybe we need to reimagine what Classic WoW actually means. Or maybe I'm just getting quite grumpy because I realise I'm now old. But all of that is still a bit hard while we have vanilla era servers, hardcore servers, and one incredibly popular Season of Discovery on the go at the same time, all taking place in the old world, nowhere even slightly near when Mists came out, or even looks like the same game. But again, releasing old expansions is still a great idea for players who missed it, or just want to experience it again for various reasons. I just think that it needs a bit of rebranding to something outside of the Classic experience. With the various expansions that we're beginning to approach, Blizzard certainly won't be doing that, but I can still dream of it. So do let me know what you think. Is Mists of Pandaria a classic version of WoW? Or do you think they should rebrand the series and release it as something else? Or is it just the fact I'm fastly approaching 30 that makes me want to complain about these things? As always, if you're new here, feel free to like and subscribe. But on that note, I think I'll say ta-ra for now, and I'll see you later.